All right, guys, you know how I do it. My name is Terrence Barker. This is Knowing Your Roots, and I got something to say. In the United States, there's been an outbreak of protests and violence against reporters.
At that man, he clearly has press on his helmet right there. We have seen that multiple times over the course of protests nationwide.
Get going! Go!
Where do I go? I'm with WCCO.
Get out! Run your wrist!
Press! Press! I'm pressed! I am pressed.
I don't care. Get down.
Okay, I'm down. I'm down.
A lot of this has happened because police have been accused of shooting or killing black men unjustly in America. So folks like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Fidel Castillo have all been victims of police violence. And with that comes the trolls on the internet. You know, stating their opinions on how they feel about the situations, furthering the divide within the United States.
It was something that I wanted to say early on, but there were so many emotions and so much pressure for me to go with a popular opinion about who George Floyd was.
On one side of the coin, you have a protest about Blue Lives Matter.
Invited by Republican Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey. Now, Trooper Douglas was shot and seriously wounded during a deadly ambush in 2014. So with Trooper Douglas in the audience, will President Obama address the wave of violence against our police? Trooper Alex Douglas joins me. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, ma'am.
Then on the other side of the coin, you have about police not being respected and people need to stop wanting handouts and police just need to be tough on crime.
Now we're getting them out anyway, but we'd like to get them out a lot faster. And when you see these towns and when you see these thugs being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, you just see them thrown in, rough. I said, please don't.
Then on the other side of the coin,
too
you have
nice.
people saying defund the police because it hasn't seen any real change. All right, so you've seen this clip of the video, okay, and on there you see the size of the extreme of left and right, and you see a little bit of in between in the video. So when you look at the video, basically you see that America has something to talk about, which could be good or bad. But let's dive right in and see all sides of this argument and see if we could come to a good conclusion that can help along everybody. Well, when we look at the situation, we have to travel back in time to history to see how we got to our current state and see how history played its part with the incarceration rates that we have today. Let the evidence speak, because today we have 1 in 3 black males and 1 in 6 Latino males versus their counterparts of 1 in 17 white males that make up the prison population. That is a big disproportion, especially when you consider the percentage that Latinos and blacks make up of the U.S. population today. So how did we get here? How did we get such a large proportion of people of color locked up in prison versus white counterparts when the white counterparts make up a large portion of the U.S. population? The simple answer to that question is over-policing in poor communities. Another contributing factor can be what Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubnar had said in Freakonomics, that abortion rights had tailored to low crimes right after Roe versus Wade had passed through, which sheds a great big light upon poor, impoverished neighborhoods. How does it do it? Well, I'm glad you asked. But first, I have to state that their findings is not an advocacy for abortion as crime prevention. As a matter of fact, they state that themselves. All they were is just looking at the data about how crime and abortion correlate between each other. In Freakonomics, we see that most of the children that would have been born at the time would have not been born into a loving family, but they would have been born more into like urban areas with impoverished families. So his conclusion says that since those children would have been deprived of certain things economically, like education, family, money, income inequality, were not born yet, crime rates started to drop after Roe v. Wade. But this doesn't tell you on how we got so many black people and people of color in poverty. All this does is tell you is on how economics are connected to actually being locked up or going to prison. So guess what? We got to dive a little bit deeper and see why this is and why so many black people and people of color are living in poverty. Let's get to it. So according to the Economic Policy Institute, black workers are twice as likely to be unemployed as white workers at almost every education level. Black college graduates are more likely than white graduates to be underemployed when it comes to their skills. That means they got the skills for the job, proven, but they're not employed at the pay level that they should be. Black unemployment and skills based upon underemployment are still too high. So why is that? According to this, they have the same skills, but guess what? When we break it down and keep it simple, it's all about discrimination. Can't get around it. Still exists in this country. So what are you saying, Terrence? Are you saying all white folks are racist? Nah, I'm not saying all white folks are racist. I'll never say that. But what I am saying is, it wasn't that long ago when people of color got their freedom. Because contrary to popular belief, the Emancipation Proclamation, it just put an end to slavery. It did not grant actual freedom. Matter of fact, it only ended slavery in the event if you committed a crime, to be actually more accurate. And we'll get later on into that. But when it comes down to it, actual real freedom for people of color didn't happen until 1964. That was the Civil Rights Act. All right. So what does that mean? It wasn't that long ago. Since the Civil Rights Bill didn't happen until 1964, actual freedom did not exist in America for people of color. So what does that mean? It wasn't that long ago. Right now, I'm a millennial. Let's put this into perspective. My dad was born prior to 1964. Okay? So that means all his rights as an American citizen had to be given to him. I am one of the first gen in my family, along with my older sister, to have all rights as an American citizen. So we still have a long way to go in this society. We have a whole bunch of post-segregation babies coming out right now. You know what I mean? First generation. So what that means is this. People who were born prior to 1964, they may have had some biases or some racial bigotries. Okay, and guess what? They raised some kids. And guess what those kids might have? Some racial or biased bigotries. Now, does that mean that like all white people who were born back then did? No. But that does mean currently right now there's still some folks who are living who may view it that way. All right? Which also tailors to the data on the hiring process for people of color on why some of those things do happen in the job. Now, is it getting better? Yes, absolutely. Are things out here like 1964? No, they are not. But do we have a long way to go? Yes, we do. What do you expect? It's only been about 1 to 2 generations. It takes time for integrating. We still are integrating in some ways. Now you might be saying, hey Terrence, that tells a lot about jobs. But what about education opportunities? What about marriage and a stable family home? Okay, well those are easy. Let's break them down. Let's get to it. Well, according to research, most non-white school areas receive $23 billion in less funding than white school areas. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a big chunk of money. The reason for this is because of how property and local state taxes are distributed to schools. Now, on the surface, this may not look as racial. However, when it comes down to it, since we are still integrating, Black communities are heavily affected by this. And now you might be saying, oh, whoa, Terrence, I'm a little offended by that. I don't see how that affects it. I don't see how that is racist. But let's break it down. Let's get to it. School funding first started back in the Puritan days in the United States, before America was America. The local community used to fund the teachers through like a uniform of like tax. So why? Because education was pretty much a public good, and it was responsible for the community to actually pay for it. Now let's fast forward a little bit. It used to be segregated in the United States, believe it or not. It was said separate but equal. Or more like separate, you know. So you used to have white neighborhoods on one side and people of color neighborhoods on the other side. If you was a person of color, you couldn't live in that certain neighborhood. Why? Because of what? Segregation. So you had many neighborhoods where people couldn't live. This was only 57 years ago. And guess what? Those schools were funded by property taxes. Now, believe it or not, if you lived in a white neighborhood, you had better homes, better job opportunities, and all sorts of benefits coming your way versus the segregated neighborhoods that had a lack of opportunity. So that means white neighborhoods had bigger homes. And since they had bigger homes, they had more property taxes going towards their schools, which is why they had better school books. This is not me saying it, this is historical facts. So, how does that deal with now? Well, since we are still integrating in many ways, we still have those poor neighborhoods. And guess what? Those property taxes do not fund as well as other neighborhoods whose property taxes may fund in abundance. Now, does this mean we may need to take a look at this property tax thing for funding education because it leads to certain inequalities in the United States? Maybe, but that's not my job. My job is to inform. Why? Because that's my YouTube channel, knowing your roots, so you know what to cut off and what to keep. Well, now you might be asking yourself, hey Terrence, I get all that systematic stuff, but there was still segregation going on. Separate but equal, right? Why didn't black people just build up their own communities? Well, I got news for you. We tried that, but every time we did, guess what happened? We got burned down and massacred. Colfax, Louisiana, 1873 massacre. Over 150 men dead for trying to assemble at a courthouse. The Wilmington, North Carolina massacre, 1898. An estimated of 60 to 300 people were killed trying to integrate in government. The Atlanta massacre, over 100 estimated to be killed for the accusation of one man raping a white woman. 1919 Arkansas Massacre, estimated 100 to 800 people murdered. White people just came in and started rioting on this one. Florida Rosewood Massacre, estimated 150 people killed and murdered. Town burned down to the ground. Accusation, assault of a white woman. 1923 Tulsa, Oklahoma Massacre, estimated 300 to 800 people murdered. Took place in 1921. Town was burned down to the ground. Accusation, assault of a white woman. Now you might be asking yourself, hey Terrence, I get all these massacres that was in the past, but what about right now? You know, is you saying that all cops is bad? Certainly not. But we do have a system that oppresses cops, you know, as well as other people. You know, so when it comes down to it, there is a lot of good cops out there. Yes, indeed. However, we do have a system that tailors towards the oppression of people of color. So how am I going to break that down? Well, first we got to start with prison for profit. How did we get here? Because guess what we do? We lock people up for profit. There's profit and misery out here in the United States.
Big prisons are extending their reach beyond jail cells to make more money off incarcerated people. The number of people incarcerated is going down in the United States, but more inmates means more money, and private prisons are looking to make a profit by providing their own services with almost no oversight by the government.
It all started with the war on drugs when the U.S. started incarcerating increasing numbers of people. And of course, the U.S. still, even with the decline over the past few years, is the most incarcerated nation in the world. And so we really saw a lot of these big companies, these big prison companies, boom alongside the war on drugs. They rose along with the rising incarceration rates in the U.S. And that's where they got their money. As you said, the more people who are in prison, the more spaces are needed, the more services are needed. And while most people are aware of the for-profit prison industry, sometimes they don't realize all of the services that also create profits for companies, like, as you mentioned, phone calls for prisoners, which oftentimes are really expensive, and food services, and health care, and even just the everyday toiletries that family members or prisoners would buy from the commissaries, and that also drives a lot of profit. And of course, when you look at the companies that provide those services, that provide, clothes and toiletries and these other small items that prisoners can buy, they're not necessarily marking up those prices, but prisoners don't really make any money. And of course, you have to take a step back and recognize that not only is the prison system expensive, but it also, we jail the poor people in the U.S. overwhelmingly. The poorest people in our societies are often the ones who are ending up behind bars.
Contrary to popular belief, the 13th Amendment never ended slavery completely in the United States. It just changed the way we do business. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Now that we have prison for profit, I think the picture is starting to become a little bit clearer. Okay? How did it all get put into place? Well, it's a little timely effort, yeah. But now let's see how police feel about it and how police have to target certain groups. Let's go in there. Let's get to it.
On the streets in certain New York City neighborhoods, ask about police quotas for arrests and summonses, and this is what you often hear.
Here's a quota system. There always has been, and there always will be until someone changes it.
Y'all see that? That's what they targeted.
Ted, take a seat right here, guys. The front row is set.
These NYPD officers, all currently on the job, say it's true. They've all worked the streets, the subways, and patrolled housing developments.
The department says there are no quotas.
Well, I could tell you, I'm a police officer, there are quotas in the NYPD.
Are they lying?
Absolutely. It's illegal for them to admit it.
They come from different precincts, largely minority neighborhoods in Brooklyn or the Bronx, but their stories are remarkably similar.
They tell you this to your face. Black Hispanics between 14 to 21. They must get stopped.
They're plaintiffs in a federal class action lawsuit that claims the NYPD is violating a 2010 state ban on quotas, speaking out together for the first time.
At the end of the month, these officers, whoever don't have that arrest, or those few summonses, they're pressured to find something. You might not see nothing. You're supposed to be visible. You might not see anything, but you go hunting, like bounty hunting for an arrest, locking up some old guy, some homeless guy, finding somebody who's riding their bicycle on the sidewalk, who's spitting, and you bring him in.
The problem is when you go hunting, when you put any type of numbers on a police officer to perform, we are gonna go to the most vulnerable.
The most vulnerable?
Of course, we're gonna go to LGBT community, we're gonna go to the black community, we're gonna go to those people that have no vote, that have no power.
Who commits the crimes? Who commits the crimes? Well, it's mostly teenagers, anywhere between the ages of 15 and 19, mostly male, blacks, and Hispanics.
Okay. Who are you stopping?
Everybody. I stop everybody.
54 tabs up to 820.
I'm not targeting anybody. First of all,
you just told me which bad guys are.
Yeah, I know that, but there's also other people who are committing violations as well. I'm not saying that there's not violations being made.
Male blacks that you commit the crime.
Plenty of people that write summonses too are male blacks and male Hispanics.
Male blacks.
Not for the whole year, and I have. You're telling me for the whole year I only stopped 2 male blacks for summonses.
820. 7 Hispanics, 7 other, 10 whites, 3 Asians. So where are you targeting the perps that you just told me?
Well, like I said, if I don't see a perp jumping over the turnstile, what am I supposed to do to him? That's what I'm saying.
These people are not going to pop.
How do I know that?
80% chance.
A female Hispanic that I stopped, she said they did pop actually for a warrant, and I arrested her. The Hispanics that were supposed to be going after that are committing the crimes. The people that I'm targeting everybody.
Who male blacks?
Whoever's out there. If I catch...
So you only saw 2 male blacks jump a turnstile?
If you're saying that's what's in front of you, then yes, that's all I saw. There's 2 male blacks for the whole year jumping the turnstile. That's what you're saying is in front of you. I stop everybody. It doesn't matter. I'm not looking at any nationality, any race, any gender. Whoever goes through and commits a violation, I am stopping.
So when you look at all the facts, you can see that there actually are some good officers out there. However, it's the system that gets to them. You know what I'm saying? It's the system that we all trapped up in. You know, we have to do something about it. Now, also on the flip side, are there some bad apples too? Yeah, we all know that. We've been looking at Facebook, YouTube all that time for these years. We definitely know there's some bad apples out there right now. They actually get off on that type of stuff. And those are the ones that we're targeting right now. But also we have to target the system that tailors to this type of oppression. Get what I'm saying? So how did we get here? How did we get to a system where prisons are profiting off of inmates and actually suing the state now? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's pretty simple. Private prisons kind of accelerated after the Civil War. Yeah, you know, the war that was about slavery that we went over. The war that forced us into writing the Emancipation Proclamation, you know, the 13th Amendment. You know, the 13th Amendment that ended slavery unless convicted of a crime. The reason for turning certain penitentiaries into private penitentiaries after the Civil War were some of the reasons that we do today. Prison population was soaring, and they couldn't afford to run the prisons by themselves. The 13th Amendment only abolished slavery unless convicted of a crime. So until the early 20th century, Southern prisoners were kept on private plantations and on company-ran labor camps. And with this, they built railroads, built levees, mined coal. And guess what other slave owners were doing since it was post-war? Racking in them dollars, baby. The game didn't stop, it just went to a different tune. Many ex-slaveholders got richer than they ever did before. They built bigger, better empires than they ever did right prior before the war. So Jim Crow made sense. You could lock up people of color for anything. You know what I'm saying? Marrying a white woman, looking at a white woman, you name it. And the beauty of it all was, since they was black, it was nothing they could do. The system was stacked up against them. Nathan Force, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. Did you know he controlled most of all convicts of the Mississippi for a period? My God, the Klan controlling prisons. Who would have thunk it? Now let's fast forward this to the war on drugs, because that's when the boom really started taking off. But before we do, we have to take a look at how Prohibition affected the war on drugs. When it came to alcohol prohibition, there's many reasons why we took it out of the Constitution. But when it came to alcohol prohibition, most of it was tied around the assumption that men who drink alcohol beat their wives. Another assumption around it was the fact that people would be less productive at work. So when it came to prohibition, most of it on why it happened came around assumptions versus the personal responsibility of somebody drinking at the own leisure of their home. So let's break that down to something simple. My tolerance for drinking is different from your tolerance of drinking. My reactions when I drink are totally different from your reactions when you drink. Me drinking does not mean that I'm going to get drunk and become a wife beater. And also, me drinking does not mean I'm going to take alcohol out of my home and then get drunk at work and be less productive. Under Prohibition, these things were the main assumptions. So we had to get rid of it because it took away the idea of personal responsibility, and it assumed that everybody was going to be put up into this stereotype of a basket. Also under Prohibition, it made more people criminals. Matter of fact, it increased the crime rate. Why? Because what do criminals do when they took an advantage of in the criminal world? They can't call the police, so guess what they do? They eliminate the people who took advantage of them. They go out and incite violence. They do things to harm people. Why? So they won't be taken advantage of, and they use violence as a form of intimidation so it won't happen again. Another reason why we eliminated alcohol prohibition, it increased search and seizure. Because when it comes to prohibition, it's a crime that is based upon assumption that you're going to be a threat to society if you take one drink of alcohol. Remember that wife beating thing? Remember that less productive at work? Yeah, the assumption. So what does that mean? You have to go into crime prevention versus crime solving mode. Most crimes are on crime solving. If you do murder, it's after the fact. If you do arson, it's after the fact. Theft or anything like that, burning down buildings, no matter what, it's all after the fact. But with prohibition, it's assumed that you're going to be a threat to society by having such a thing. That's why it's prohibited. So that means you have to design certain task force and certain elements to go after where you think the product is hot. That way you could prohibit the product from being out on the streets. So on the alcohol prohibition days, it was the clubs. So we eliminated alcohol prohibition because it targeted certain groups based upon assumption. It made more people criminals, and at the same time, it increased search and seizure for people who were doing totally innocent things, like having fun or a casual drink and dancing. Now let's fast forward to marijuana prohibition. It all started with a guy named Harry Anslinger. He believed that blacks and Mexicans would become a threat to society if they smoked reefer. No joke, look at his words. So he came out with propaganda tactics targeting Mexicans and blacks and people who were in jazz joints. He helped popularize movies like Reefer Madness that said youth will go in raping each other and start going mad and wrecking things if they smoked just a hit of marijuana.
Innocently they dance, innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell.
So pretty much after all this propaganda and Anslinger's success in other areas, weed became taxed. People started to get locked up over marijuana. And through the years, this kept happening over and over again. Then we get to this guy.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive. This will be a worldwide offensive dealing with the problems of sources of supply as well as Americans who may be stationed abroad wherever they are in the world. It will be government-wide, pulling together the 9 different fragmented areas within the government in which this problem is now being handled. And it will be nationwide in terms of a new educational program that we trust will result from the discussions that we have had. With regard to this offensive, it is necessary first to have a new organization. And the new organization will be within the White House. Dr. Jaffe, who will be one of the briefers here today, will be the man directly responsible. He will report directly to me. And he will have the responsibility to take all of the government agencies, 9, that deal with the problems of rehabilitation, in which his primary responsibilities will be research and education, and see that they work not at cross purposes, but work together in dealing with the problem.
Well, you guessed it. Shortly after Nixon declared the war on drugs and the DEA was built, imprisonments just started climbing and climbing and climbing. And then we are to where we are right now. We now have over 74% held by jail and not convicted of a crime. We now have over 1 million people in state prison and 615,000 in jail. Cotton is no longer king. We now have a new cash crop and it's singing an old tune. It's called Manpower. we learn in this video? Well, we learned a lot of things. One, we learned that why a lot of people of color are still in these old neighborhoods that are broken down. Why? Because post-segregating. Another one that we learned is that, hey, when it comes down to it, prisons are profiting off of people going to prison. And they can sue the state if they don't have enough prisoners. Then also we kind of learned something else. We learned something about cops too. You know what I'm saying? What we learned is, hey, cops have to target folks. But at the same time, do a lot of them like it? Not really. But do we have a few bad apples? Yes, we do. It's hard out there. It's hard on both sides of the scale. But when we really take a look at it, guess what? We can see the full picture. So what do we do with this? Do we riot, burn down the streets? Do we go at it with each other? Nah, man, my channel ain't about that. My channel is about stopping the divide. It's about knowing your roots. But one of the things we need to ask is, you know, what about this war on drugs, especially marijuana prohibition? You know what I'm saying? When it comes to that marijuana prohibition, I have to rethink some things. Then also at the same time, why do we have prisons for profit? You know, we have to start talking about some of these things. Is a possible solution? I don't know. We might also want to start talking about policing, you know, and these quotas. You know, although there's some of these quotas that have been deemed illegal, you know, why are some of them up on the books? You know, a lot of this tailors towards this system. But I don't know. I ain't got the answer. My channel is about knowing your roots, so you know what to cut off and what to keep. I just deliver the info, you know what I'm saying? All right, other than that, I'm out.